So Sonic the Hedgehog, eh?
So yeah, like when this came out, like I knew that they were working on it because, you know, what was it, like 6 or 8 months ago, first poster or teaser poster came out and it was just like Sonic in silhouette on the poster. And the internet freaked out then because they didn't like how muscular his legs were. And then there was all these Photoshop jobs and, you know, that people made, you know, jokes at its expense for maybe about a week. And then it went totally like nothing was heard from it. And then here this trailer drops this week and people go even more insane. Like I would say it's equal to, if not more freak out than Will Smith as the genie.
Do you concede at least though, like the Sonic in the movie looks incredibly nightmarish?
Oh yeah. He doesn't look anything like
He doesn't look anything like Sonic.
The original video game character. No, and like with these strange sort of like eyes that are too small for the character, like, or at least not what we expect.
The teeth,
the human teeth,
the legs.
The legs, hands. Which are, they've put a bit of musculature on them to make, and it's all obviously done in an effort to like make Sonic feel like he could exist in a live action human world, you know, because I guess they figure that a character with his spindly legs from the original games wouldn't make sense in a live action universe. But who cares though? We're dealing with a hedgehog, a blue hedgehog that moves faster than the speed of sound. So why does he have to be so like quasi realistic?
I agree. It's kind of like, even with the muscles that you put on his legs, there's no way he'd be able to run that fast anyway. So what are you trying to shoot for here?
Exactly. And there's so much to talk about with this. I almost think let's do our intro and then come back afterwards and talk about it again a little bit because I don't want it all be in the cold opener. The cold open would be like 5 or 10 minutes long.
Okay, fine.
Hello and welcome to the show. This is the Extra Buttery Podcast, episode 49, our 9th episode of 2019. As you just heard, we're going to be talking a little bit about the Sonic the Hedgehog controversy. It's a bit of a weird one to start with, but seems to be burning up the internet these days, so we'll touch on that. But the two big banner topics in this episode will be Avengers Endgame, big pop culture moment this year and worthy of a lot of discussion, and episode 3 of season 8 of Game of Thrones. We'll be getting into that. Huge battle scene, lots of important stuff happens, so there's a lot to talk about there as well. But coming to you from Toronto, my name is Robert Snow, and joining me from Vancouver is my co-host, Jason Chen. How's it going?
Good. How are you?
Yeah, as we were saying in the cold open, like the internet basically flipped out about this in a way that, you know, they do occasionally. But I think the important thing here, or the detail that I was most fascinated by, was how the director actually spoke up and said, hey, fans of Sonic, we hear you, we respect you. We're going to change this character before the movie comes out. We're going to actually go in and change this preemptively, which I don't think you hear about a whole lot in pretty much any movie. It feels like a little bit of a precedent-setting move.
Well, I think people reacting negatively in the trailer and then them going back to fix it, I find is fairly common. Do you remember the Bane dialogue in the original Dark Knight Rises trailer?
Oh, yeah. It was pretty muffled. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, and so they went back and did ADR. What we haven't really seen is them basically completing the film and then going back and redoing the whole thing.
Yeah.
I can't for the life of me remember any film that's ever done that. Like gone right back to the drawing board this late into the game.
Yeah, with like 6 months to release or less.
Exactly. And actually coming out ahead. In my sort of experience, every film that has done late reshoots or done late changes always comes out as sort of a lame product, kind of cobbled together.
Yeah.
But from the trailer, the fact that it was even like synced to Gangster's Paradise just tells me like this project has obviously been through so many hands and so many creative minds that it's hard to see where the connective tissue is.
Yeah.
And as a longtime fan of the video game, it was actually one of the first video games I've ever played. I'm kind of wary of Jim Carrey as well, being Dr. Robotnik. He's gone back to like the 90s comic Jim Carrey, which may fit the tone of this film or it may not. but I'm very intrigued to see where they take it, because I'm not exactly sure what the plot would be.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like it's, pretty by the books origin story where, Sonic is unknown to humankind, and then he does something to kind of get on the radar of the U.S. government, and Robotnik is brought in as a consultant to kind of round up Sonic.
He causes like blackouts or something, and they have to hunt him down or something like that.
The thing that people were also talking about, which is kind of interesting because it's happening sort of at the same time as a similar discussion in the video game industry, but this idea of like digital artist burnout and the way that CG artists these days are often like they're being expected to work like 14, 16 hour days. Sometimes they're not getting paid on time. The companies that they work for are just like kind of parachuted in to do like flimsy contracts by Hollywood studios. And I feel like this decision by the production company to kind of kowtow to the fans, while, it may get us a more authentic product, it kind of means that the lives of all the people who are going to be working on this to fix it in post, their lives are going to be hell for the next few months.
Well, I mean, I have a friend who works in sort of the CGI movie industry, and they get paid quite a bit of overtime. So it's not so much the pressure of the work itself. I think for them, it's kind of like the work-life balance that really suffers. And I think these like CGI movies sort of farm out their work to like,
yeah, for sure,
5 to 10 different companies. Like it's not just one studio that does it, all the CGI in-house. It's very rare for that to happen.
No, that's true. So like, there'll be one company that specializes in like fire and smoke effects, and there'll be another company that specializes in like digital backgrounds, like digital sets and stuff. And then there'll be another company that's really good at doing characters. So I guess it'll be whatever company is doing most of the work on the characters here that will probably have the brunt of the work here. But it was interesting to see online some of the conversations between people being like, yeah, like that they were saying, from my perspective, working in the video game industry, for example, I've been forced to pull crazy hours and like never see my family, and my health deteriorated and all this stuff. And there's some worry that like, if more and more movies try to appease the fans preemptively and change things last minute, it could set a really bad precedent for the movie industry. That,
and also movies and their sort of weird strictness to adhering to like strict deadlines. I get it. I get why they do it, but I've always kind of like, you remember when Star Wars and Marvel came out with all these release dates for all these future films? And what happens in the end is that because you've made all these grand, bold promises, you end up rushing productions. So Han Solo, that Star Wars story, is definitely one of them, I feel like. Rogue One was delayed because there's like multiple reshoots, multiple rewrites. And I think that film suffered for it. So maybe it's good that Sonic, for them, is just like the appearance of the character that most people have a bone to pick with. It's not like a major plot issue. So I feel like
you would hope. I mean,
yeah, exactly. So maybe they dodged a bullet there. I don't know.
Yeah, well, we'll definitely have to see in November. I mean,
I'm not paying to watch this, Rob.
Well, yeah, here's the thing. Like, if I'm not using scene points or if I'm not getting it for free in some way, then it's not happening.
Yeah, exactly. And that's Prestige month, eh? Like November. That's when you got all these other great dramas and thrillers coming out.
Yeah, so I got to prioritize my time, man. Like, as much as I want to see a train wreck in action, like this, I don't know.
We just saw one in Hellboy. I think we're good for now.
Yeah. So maybe I'll just cram in another quick little discussion on because we're on the topic of movies being changed at the last minute.
Sure.
Have you heard at all about Doug Liman's project Chaos Walking?
No.
So this is a sci-fi YA or young adult adaptation based on some series of books that I was not familiar with.
Is this the one that Constance Wu just signed on?
She might have done in like a minor role, but the two leads in this movie are actually Daisy Ridley from Star Wars and Tom Holland, who plays Spider-Man.
Okay, yes. Okay, I briefly heard about this through Daisy Ridley, but I don't know much. Anyway, go ahead.
So basically, like, this movie, I think they released an initial like promo shot of Holland and Ridley in costume. I feel like maybe even 2 years ago. And I was like kind of wondering what was going on with it because, I like Doug Liman. I really liked Edge of Tomorrow, for example. I liked his work in the Firstborn movie.
Yes.
So, he's a filmmaker that I'm interested in. And every so often I'd check his IMDb page and I'd see this reference to Chaos Walking, and it said, oh, it's going to come out in March of 2019. Confirmed. This is the release date. And we get closer and closer and closer. There's no additional promo shots. There's no trailer. So, obviously anyone who watches the industry is like, this isn't shaping up too good. Clearly something's wrong. And then finally, it gets to be a few weeks ago, and they make the news breaks that the project in its current state is unwatchable. And multiple executives have come and viewed it, and they say that they just can't release it in its current state. It'll be such a waste of money for them that they would rather it stay on the shelf.
So what's wrong with it?
Nobody knows, but basically they're launching into some pretty expensive reshoots now. Like both Holland and Ridley apparently have posted on Instagram about they're going back to the set. They're dressing up in costume again in some kind of mad attempt to fix the thing, which is too bad because the concept is, it's got a dystopian sci-fi thing, which I tend to go for. I like both of them as actors. Doug Liman again, I like him as a filmmaker. So it seems like they just didn't crack the story such that it is, or maybe that's the material's too dense. We'll have to see now how much longer it's going to be before this thing finally comes out, and whether they can save it at all, because it could be a really embarrassing flop otherwise.
Well, if they don't think they can save it, then they wouldn't have done all the reshoots, right? So on some level, they think it's a salvageable project.
Sure, maybe they can sell it to Netflix or something, because Netflix has been a savior of many kind of mediocre film recently, because sometimes it's better to sell it to Netflix than to risk a lot of money making a lot of digital prints and putting it into theaters and putting a lot of money in marketing behind it.
Fair enough. But what's in it for Netflix?
Oh, well, I guess Netflix could just add it as one of their original movies, and
But I don't think it benefits Netflix to add shitty original movies.
Well, define shitty though, because they've published a whole lot of stuff recently that's that's mid-tier. It's not super innovative, but it's got great actors in it, and essentially they just figure if they put it in front of all of their millions of subscribers all in one day, that it'll find an audience that it wouldn't find in a traditional theater distribution.
Yeah, I get that. So they'll find an audience, but as an audience, if the quality of Netflix originals keeps going downhill, I'm just never going to watch it.
Sure, yeah.
They lose their credibility. So for something like Bright, where they produced it and wrote it themselves, they made their own grave. But as a studio, I'm not sure why they would purchase a shitty film unless they believe it has some sort of cult potential, like The Room or something.
I don't know. I mean, I feel like they're in such a mad dash to acquire stuff that they're not really exercising that level of scrutiny.
Well, I hope they do, because it could turn out pretty bad for them.
Because I think about some of the stuff that I've seen pop up recently. There was a Stanley Tucci vehicle called The Silence that had a handful of recognizable people in it, but nobody's talking about it. But they just posted it.
I think Netflix's best programming are their original documentaries, especially about food. They just released a new one, Street Food, right? So
yeah, for sure.
But we're getting off track now. The whole point of this episode was to talk about Endgame and Game of Thrones, two, I think, of the most mainstream, big budget cultural touchstones, I think you could call it.
Yeah, pop culture moments.
Yes, exactly. That I think has never ever been done at this scale.
No.
Avengers Endgame, by the way, has already cracked $2 billion. So I believe it has already passed Titanic. So the only one it has to gun for now is Avatar, and I believe we're only less than 2 weeks into its initial release run.
Yeah, so there's still there could be as many as 8 or 9, maybe even 10 weeks left to go before it'll leave theaters entirely. So that's more than enough time to pass Avatar. If something pretty crazy would have to happen to stop that from breaking the record. How do you want to do this? Do you want to talk spoilers right out of the gate? Because when this episode comes out, the official ban on spoilers, as described by the Russo brothers, the filmmakers.
There's an official timeline of ban? How long is this? I've never heard about it.
They went on Good Morning America last week, and they said, all right, the ban for spoilers, in their opinion, was going to lift on Monday, May the 6th, which would be...
Okay, so we're fine.
Even if there's a small chance, we owe this to everyone who's not in this room to try.
We both saw it opening weekend, and I know that for a fact that we have kind of we're in consensus that it's a pretty good film, but I think where we diverge is where the film ranks and what the strengths of this film are. So you tell me what you thought of the film first, because I think you liked it, as usual, a little more than me.
Okay, well, I mean, on Letterboxd, for example, I'm going like 4.5 out of 5. Not because I feel like it's a near perfect film, but just because...
See, that's the interesting part. But yeah, go ahead.
Because for me, it was an example of like pure entertainment where there's not a lot happening there on a filmmaking level that's super like fresh or innovative. You know, if you've seen any of the past 21 Marvel movies, you know what you're getting with this. For me, it was just that the kind of like itch being scratched of all of these character moments.
Yeah, I agree.
And I point this out in my review for Kinetoscope where, you know, for the past like 21 movies, there's always been a handful of scenes, either mid-credits or end credits, that are setting up something in the future. And that thing that they're setting up is this movie. So this movie then kind of delivers on all of those little breadcrumbs, and it closes off all of these threads, and it gives you arguably more moments to just sort of hang out with the characters and have fun with them than it does, you know, resolving a particular narrative.
Right.
It does resolve the cliffhanger. That was probably its biggest goal coming out of Infinity War. It resolves the cliffhanger of what happened to all of the heroes who were temporarily dusted. But it gives you so many like just stupid fan service moments that are kind of like junk food, like Fat Thor. I love Fat Thor. He's my favorite version of Thor now, at least until like Thor comes back in maybe the new Guardians of the Galaxy movie.
Right.
And just such a fun way to take his character, you know, from you look at how like brash and self-obsessed he was in the very first Thor, and now he's kind of like dejected and self-pitying and just totally gross, but hanging out playing Fortnite with his friend Korg on the couch in New Asgard. Like,
well, don't forget Meek too.
Well, Meek's there, yeah, can't forget about Meek. But yeah, moments like that, or Professor Hulk, like this is kind of, I think, the reward that all the fans probably wanted from kind of sitting through all of the, you know, halfways well plotted stuff that's come before.
So on Letterboxd, I went 4 out of 5. And I agree with you that this is very much a final chapter on basically 11 years of build-up. But I don't really rate a film or rank a film based on how many, you know, fan service moments it has. I'd even hesitate to call them fan service moments, because I think all the moments, including Captain America and Iron Man and all that, you know, sentimental stuff and all the one-on-one superhero time you get, wouldn't have had the same impact had you not had the 11 years of build-up. So in sort of judging this film, it was very hard for me to separate it from Infinity War. I think Infinity War has a much more compelling storyline and villain. Endgame is sort of the second half of it, so it wraps up a lot of the cliffhangers, as you said.
Yes.
But because it brings back Thanos as a villain, it has a bit of a villain problem where he becomes basically one of those villains where he's just like, I'm going to destroy everything. And I had problems with that. Just
because it's too one note. Like, we go from a guy who has a poorly defended, but, you know, an understandable, maybe not even understandable is the right word. Like, you know, he believes that life is eating up too many resources in the universe. So he's going to kill half of it, which is like unthinkable and totally like despicable. But there are some people who can kind of they can wrap their minds around that logic of like trying to cut back on excess and find a more sustainable way to live. So all of those motivations make sense, even if his choices don't. And yeah, and then in this one, it's more about just like throwing him against all of the various heroes until the heroes win.
Yeah, and there's so much character moments that mostly, I think, are confined to the original cast. So it's Fat Thor, Iron Man being old, Captain America being nostalgic. But by the end, because you spend and Black Widow and Professor Hulk, you spend so much time with these characters that everyone else gets like 3 minutes of screen time, and that's it.
Like Chris Pratt barely says like 5 words in it.
Does he even say anything? I don't even know. I don't even know if Black Panther says a word of English in it. I think he just goes, Wakanda forever, and does like a war cry, and they all kind of like, you know, rush at Thanos.
Right, yeah.
I do feel like it's a very well done film. It didn't feel like 3 hours long, but I just, from a storytelling perspective, didn't feel like it was very compelling. didn't feel like it was fresh or new. I didn't feel like the stakes were as high as Infinity War. But then again, like you really have to watch these two films as one. It's kind of like if you had to subjectively rate or objectively rate Harry Potter, Deathly Hallows Part 1 and Part 2, it's really hard to do because they're one film.
Yeah.
It's not like Kill Bill where like tonally and story-wise they're completely different with just a bit of connective tissue. You really have to invest your time into these like 6-hour stories.
True. Yeah, I will agree with you there. Like the ending of Infinity War is abrupt enough that it, you know, if we're talking about like standalone movies or movies that can be watched on their own and form, you know, what we would traditionally call a complete in air quotes narrative, then yeah, like Infinity War isn't like a complete film in that sense, and neither is Endgame. You know, they work together. So I agree with you there.
I will say though, as far as character send-offs go, I kind of knew that either Iron Man or Captain America would die.
Yep.
But their send-off of Captain America was very well done.
Yes, I agree. Yeah.
The only issue I had is why the fuck does he give the shield to Falcon and not freaking Winter Soldier? Like, what's Falcon gonna do with the shield? He's like a normal person without super strength, and he's got wings. Like, shouldn't it go to Winter Soldier, who has like who is a super soldier and maybe knows how to use the shield a bit better? Like, I get that the Falcon is more symbolic of, you know, America. But I always thought that was kind of funny.
Yeah, well, I think there's probably been different runs of this in the comics, but I think there was one where Sam, the Falcon, becomes Captain America. There was one where the Winter Soldier, Bucky Barnes, becomes Captain America.
Yes.
So I think they could have gone either way, but then from the way they've kind of used Bucky up to this point, especially the time that he spent recovering in Wakanda, they seem to be going down a path towards turning Bucky into a character known as White Wolf.
Yes.
So if he becomes White Wolf, then I don't think he can also be Captain America.
The other thing I kind of want to talk about was time travel in this movie. I hate time travel in movies because it makes my mind wander. Like it becomes sort of like a whole new discussion of its own.
Yeah, it's a license to print money narratively because, you know, as a device, it doesn't make any sense.
Right.
Anyway, and no matter how much characters talk their way around it, it never really makes sense, and it's kind of just a way to enable things that were previously impossible.
Yeah, so two things. One is that obviously Loki's coming back. He's not dead.
Or at least for a Disney Plus show.
Yes, but the fact that they think that he disappears with the Tesseract, I think, is a hint that he's going to come back.
Yeah.
And he's not going to be like the new reformed Loki. He's just going to be the old sniveling mischievous.
Yeah, but was Loki ever truly reformed anyway? Like, even at the end of...
I think that was the whole point of Infinity War. Like, in that timeline, he had reformed, and in that timeline, that Loki, I think, was definitively killed by Thanos.
True, but then, like, even that version of Loki, like he survived the Ragnarok, like the end of the destruction of Asgard and stuff, but I don't think anybody truly trusted him.
No, of course not. But I do think that him trying to kill Thanos, I think, was basically a move for self-preservation and basically to save Asgard along with it. So maybe that's it. My second question would be, so if Captain America goes back to the 70s or whatever it was, no, not the 70s, the time of Peggy Carter was 40s.
Yeah, so like late 40s, early 50s, something like that.
Okay, so if he goes back and stays there and he sends Old Man Cap back, how does that work? Which timeline is Old Man Cap from? And what about the other America in the 1950s timeline original?
Well, I think what they're saying is that, and you know, this may also not make any sense, but basically Captain America, we followed his adventures up until the point where he goes back in time at the end of Endgame. And at that point, he's got all the Infinity Stones with him, and he's got to put them back where they got them in across time and space. And I think like Hulk or somebody says to him before he goes, like, take your time. Like, obviously you don't have to rush. We're not on any kind of time limit. You can hop around and put them back in a way that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so he does that. Like, he goes and restores all the stones, but then he thinks to himself, well, hey, like, I'm owed a little bit of a life too. So then he meets up with Peggy, ostensibly like gets married, you know, they have a whole healthy life together and they live till, you know, he looks to be like, what, 70 or 80 or something when he pops back. So I think like he just makes the choice to not return to the time that he left until he's lived a full life.
I see. Okay. All right. Because that was kind of confusing. And I guess you could just be like, oh, well, he knew what to do with the stones and he didn't screw anything up. See ya.
Well, which is like, honestly, probably one of my favorite emotional parts of the whole movie. Like the jokes and everything aside, as a character, he's probably suffered more than others, or not been allowed to live a normal like non-superhero life as far as what we've seen in the movies. Whereas like Tony Stark was able to go off and have a family for a while with Pepper, and a few of the other characters had like alter ego lives, but Cap didn't. So the fact that they kind of say goodbye to Chris Evans in that way was a nice touch. And I think that was true of a few of the other goodbyes too. Like certainly Tony Stark's one made sense. He was also like, narratively, it was satisfying. A few people have complained that Black Widow's goodbye wasn't very good, but she's also getting her own.
What happened to her?
Well, she
again?
like dies on Vormir or something.
Right. Oh, yeah. Okay. So that was definitely the one twist I didn't see coming at all.
Right. Because I think that people figured because they'd announced a solo Black Widow movie, which will also have David Harbour in it, incidentally, that she was going to survive Endgame. But I think
well, that would be a prequel.
Well, so people weren't definitively sure because like they haven't talked about the plot at all of this one. So she could have survived Endgame, and then that movie would happen chronologically after Endgame, or it could have been a prequel. But now we know it's a prequel.
The part 2 where like her and Jeremy Renner kind of like doing like a cliffhanger kind of deal where like, no, you die. No, you die. No, you die. That went on for like maybe 1 or 2 moves too long where I was just like, dude, just someone please just die.
Yeah.
Please.
Yeah.
But to its credit though, like I said this to my friend who I watched it with, like, it didn't feel like a 3-hour movie, so kudos to them. Yeah,
there are definitely movies that have hit that runtime where you're feeling like it's 6 hours. So yeah, and I think your mileage may vary. Obviously, if you haven't seen it yet and you're listening to the podcast and somehow you've listened through all these spoilers, but I saw a few people complaining that it was too long, or that they weren't for one reason or another they just weren't invested in the Marvel stuff. And
for the amount of narrative storytelling it covers, yeah, it doesn't need to be that long. But I mean, if you want to give Thor and Iron Man and every single character sort of their own moments, I mean, less than half an hour each for each of them with like 4 or 5 characters that you have to service. So
yeah, there's like 60 characters or more. So yeah,
something like that. That's why so many of them appear for like 2 minutes and then they're done.
Exactly. And who knows? I mean, maybe they'll all get their chance at having bigger parts now that Cap and Tony are gone.
Were you surprised that Natalie Portman showed up? Apparently that was unused footage from Dark World.
People had asked her whether she was going to be in Endgame, and she kind of like, she didn't have an answer for them, or didn't know, or something like that.
Yeah, because it's kind of like yes, kind of no.
Yeah, but so they just reused some footage. But yeah, I don't think she's mentioned a few times that her experience making the first 2 Thor movies wasn't very good for her. Like she just doesn't enjoy making those kind of blockbuster movies. So. Well,
also because there was a huge controversy. Remember Patty Jenkins was hired to direct it.
Yeah, so she was angry about that. Yeah, which is totally valid. But so yeah, I guess they had the rights to use that last little chunk of footage of her.
It's also really funny that it took them 3 movies to figure out what Chris Hemsworth Thor should be like. I think the first film, they were kind of like, hey, here's this thunder god. Let's kind of make him sort of like Superman and fish out of water. The second film, we won't even talk about because it's not worthwhile. But by the third time, like Chris Hemsworth, who's a really funny actor, by the way, has really settled into this like Lebowski surf dude type Thor.
Oh, man, the Lebowski joke. I love that to death. Like,
but overall, this does mark like the end of the Marvel chapter, and I'm glad that they ended it on their terms and not anyone else's. I mean, I know we're going to get like a bunch of sequels coming out.
Oh, sure. And there'll be all this content for Disney Plus. And, there's many ways in which Endgame works as like a giant 3-hour trailer for Disney Plus.
Mm-hmm. Was it bittersweet for you walking out of the theater knowing that was like the last time you'll ever see Chris Evans and Robert Downey Jr. as Iron Man and Captain America?
Not especially. I mean, I kind of take the macro view where, I'm glad that they were able to exit the franchise on their own terms, and they came up with endings that are, it's a good balance. You get like one major death in the death of Iron Man, and you get one character kind of, ending his story, but not like dying. He just, he gets to live out his life in a way that matters to him. So that.
Yeah. Well, 2 major deaths, right? Black Widow is one of them.
Oh yeah. But
see, we always forget about her death and her sacrifice.
Yeah. Well, she hasn't existed in her own solo movie yet. It's hard to really care about her. That's a fault on like Feige and some of the other producers, because they've resisted doing a solo Black Widow movie and giving us material to really make us care about her.
I do wonder why they never really came up with a Black Widow solo movie until after Avengers, but neither here nor there. I do think though that all the original members of the first Avengers film, I feel like she's definitely one of the founding members. So her death was kind of bittersweet. I do found it bittersweet though, that because like the casting I think was so pitch perfect. It was kind of sad to see them leave in that sense, because there's a feeling that any new iteration of Iron Man and Captain America would just never live up to this.
Are you sure? Because I mean, there are versions of them in the comics that are kind of interesting. Like there was a version,
right? But who else would you play them? Who else would play them? That's my thing.
Well, it wouldn't be Tony Stark. It would be another character who takes up the mantle.
Okay, yeah. So that's different though. But I mean, 20 years from now, if they decide to reboot it, it wouldn't be the same without Chris Evans and Robert Downey Jr.
I don't know. I mean, like, you know, we talk all the time about various Batman that we've liked. You know, I always like Christian Bale as Batman, and I like Michael Keaton, you know. Yeah,
the first ones, yeah. If you ask hardcore Batman fans, the one and only true Batman is Kevin Conroy.
Right, of course, yeah, from the animated series.
And no other voice actor would probably ever come close to him.
I don't know. I feel like I'm not so prescriptive in the way I kind of watch this stuff, where I'm like, if in 10 or 20 years they have to recast Tony Stark, you know, as long as that actor stay true to the essence of the character while doing their own thing, I think it's totally fine.
You mean you didn't like Halle Berry's Catwoman? Like, it's kind of like Hugh Jackman as Wolverine. Like, it'd have to be someone really drastic and a whole new interpretation of the character for me to see someone else in that role, just because Hugh Jackman had played it for so long and had really made it into his own and had captured some of the qualities of Wolverine in the comics, same as Tony Stark and Iron Man. Remember, without Robert Downey Jr. as Tony Stark, and he wasn't even the first choice, right? Jon Favreau had to fight for him. Without him as Iron Man, this whole franchise doesn't take off the ground.
That's true. Yeah. I mean, if they had gone with somebody else, like
Tom Cruise at one point.
If Tom Cruise had done it, you know, maybe this wouldn't have been the level that it is.
Exactly. Tom Cruise already killed that Universal Monsters universe, so he could have easily killed Marvel's universe before.
He's a cinematic universe killer.
Exactly, right? Because his star's just too big, and he takes up too much space with his name. It's just not his fault. It's just his stature alone overshadows everything else.
But no, I think let's think about like Joker movies, for example. Like, you know, Jack Nicholson, great. Heath Ledger, great. Jared Leto, terrible. Joaquin Phoenix, potential to be great, right?
Mark Hamill,
also great. So I don't want to kind of sit here, you know, without knowing what's going to happen 10 years down the road or however long it is, and kind of say that Robert Downey Jr. is the one and only Tony Stark, or Chris Evans is the one and only Captain America. You know, maybe Jacob Tremblay will be the next great Captain America. You don't know.
No, he's too sensitive.
But he could be like, he could turn into a hulking rage dude.
Like Neville Longbottom.
Like that.
No, but I honestly think that like Joker is different because that's a character that's always been open to interpretation. There's never been like one Joker that's really encompassed every single Joker that's ever been created. But whereas Iron Man has always been this like really smart, high-tech, scientific genius dude with a big ego. Captain America I can see being replaced because I think he's just a more golden boy character, and you can find a lot of those, but the right amount of assholeness and the right amount of charisma, it's hard to do that for Iron Man.
It's something that only a decade of hard drugs and alcohol can do to a person.
No, hey, you know what? The Iron Man in the comics went through the same phase, so I think there's something to be said about the two characters being so similar that they were meant to. Basically, Robert Downey Jr. was meant to play this guy.
Shia LaBeouf
as Iron Man? No way. No.
I'm joking, obviously.
If Shia LaBeouf was Iron Man, his armor would just be like the craziest mishmash of different things you've ever seen. It'd probably like have like homeless clothes on it.
No, I'm just saying, like, you know, if we're talking about actors who have substance abuse problems who may have a comeback, then, you know.
Hey, why stop there? Why not go to like Gary Busey as Iron Man? Why don't we have who's been to rehab a lot? Ben Affleck, he was a good Bruce Wayne.
Yeah,
actually,
so there you go.
Because he had so much inner demons, I guess. But anyway, I think we got to move on because Game of Thrones is another one that we need to discuss a bit more, because I think for this episode 3 that we just watched, I think it is more divisive between the two of us.
The Night King is coming.
The dead are already here.
You really? Did you not like it or something?
I honestly, no. I think that of all the Game of Thrones episodes we've seen, especially including big battles, that was the worst one.
Actually, I kind of agree with you now that I think about it. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Like when you think about...
Like if you think about Hardhome, Blackwater, the Set Baylor being blown up, even some of like the sort of minor battles, but battles in the War of the Five Kings, I thought those were way more well done than this one and the excursion to the north to capture White, which to me still makes no sense.
Yeah.
But I think the broader argument, the broader topic for Game of Thrones is that I feel like it's kind of lost its way. That we started with this political drama, it became a fantasy epic, and now it's hard to revert back to that political drama. But if you're a fantasy epic, you have to follow certain rules, including having like a hero who's destined to be the hero. And so when you sort of subvert that expectation, it becomes unsatisfying. And I think that the whole episode, despite the long time run length and like the frankly amazing visuals, I think it on a storytelling standpoint, it really, really fails. I was disappointed after kind of thinking about it a bit more about how this episode turned out.
Yeah, I would agree with you. Yeah, like shocker. No, because the feeling that I couldn't shake the whole time I was watching this episode was it was done better in Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers.
I agree.
Just the whole battle, you know, the beats, and they even borrowed a few beats from the Battle of Minas Tirith in Return of the King, I thought.
Yeah.
Certainly how, like, you know, they kind of have a silver bullet essentially type happen where they knock out the chief bad guy and the whole thing falls apart. And all of these characters survive. So yeah, there's in terms of like the military side of it and the tactics and all those things that were done so well or were a lot more comprehensible, at least in some of the other battles, you know, in the Battle of the Bastards, like you got a sense of like where everyone was on the battlefield. And that doesn't even have anything to do with like the cinematography and the lighting in this episode, which some people complained was too dark. A cinematographer and the director kind of said, no, this was the intention, you know, and your mileage may vary. Again, it felt like there was a pretty rote kind of siege type battle going on, which is just kind of the vehicle for a few character choices that, I don't know, it felt like they were convenient.
Yes. Okay. So let's break it up, like down from top to bottom. I think you and I are both in agreement that when you have Brienne, Jaime, Jon, Theon, and all these like supposedly great military minds gathered to form a game plan, that the game plan they came up with was the absolute worst ever.
Yeah, because they're like, oh, we're going to toss all of our cavalry guys at a force that we know is almost unstoppable and
into the darkness.
Yeah,
like without them charging at us when we're in like at a position of strong defense. They're just like, yeah, we'll just send out our cavalry into the cold open. Yeah. Visually great. It was awesome to see those little like candles basically kind of go out. But the trebuchets being in front of the trenches, the trenches themselves being lit on fire by a dragon when they should have had a plan B. But the other thing is too, were you as bothered by the fact that not as many named main characters died as you'd expect or as other people expected? Did that bother you? It didn't bother me that much.
I wasn't bothered, no, because I mean, you know, granted, you know, maybe I think we all went into it feeling like a lot of people were going to die. And then when they don't, you're kind of, especially some of like the secondary characters that we figured were goners.
Like Grey Worm?
Like Grey Worm or Varys or, you know, people whose arcs had pretty much ended and didn't really serve a huge purpose you know, for what we expect from the final episodes. So yeah, like maybe it was just kind of like, it was a sense of relief mixed with kind of like, oh, well, I didn't get the kind of shock to the system that I expected.
The show goes on for quite a bit. The battle actually is quite intense. I actually really like the dragons kind of flying in the air and fighting each other.
Yep.
And the part where they break through from the blizzard and they're at the top and there's the moon shining down, and there's just two dragons in the sky. I thought that was all well done.
Yeah, that was a good shot. Yeah.
And then, so to break up all this action, they decided to insert a scene with Arya in the library running away from zombies in sort of like a horror genre. So the way they broke up the episode, because they were afraid that people were going to get war fatigue. So they inserted all these slower moments to break it up. I get why they focused on Arya. I know that she is a very much an important character and that she is vital to the plot against Cersei and the Night King. I wasn't sure how I felt about the horror scene. I felt that was a little tacked on. I felt like you could have replaced that with something else and it would have been just as effective in breaking it up. I didn't necessarily think this episode had to be 80 minutes. Did you enjoy that horror?
I didn't have strong feelings about it. I felt like that one actually, I felt I was watching it with our friends Peter and Kate, and we were all in agreement that it was basically riffing on the kitchen scene from Jurassic Park.
Yeah. So did they enjoy that scene though?
I think we all kind of came out of it being like, oh, okay, that was pretty solid. I don't think any of us were like floored by any part of it, other than maybe the surprise with the Night King at the very end.
Yeah, and there's just various inconsistencies about the whites and how powerful they are. So if you remember when they brought the white down to King's Landing, it was basically held in a freaking wooden box, like bound together by rope.
Yeah.
But now in the crypts, they're busting through walls. They're doing all sorts of crazy stuff. So I think one of the main things about this episode was that there was no consistency at all. And what was with the Night King being immune to dragonfire? I don't understand that. Like, isn't that a Targaryen thing? Like, am I missing something here? Is
he just too cold?
Maybe. One of those like Willy Wonka's everlasting popsicles, I guess. But like, are we missing something here? Or do you think the writers really went off the rails in an attempt to build suspense and give you visually arresting an episode that they threw everything out the window? And there's a part of me that thinks that George R.R. Martin just fed him a bunch of like false information and just be like, here you go, here's how you write the show, but I'm going to do something completely different in my books.
Oh yeah, that would be funny actually if he totally like knifed them in the back with that. I think they ultimately they just wanted to build up the fact that there's really only one way to take down the Night King, and whatever you think you know about dragons, you don't actually know.
Okay, so based on that, though, the reason why Jon came back to life, the reason why Melisandre came back, was all because they wanted to help Dany take the Iron Throne. Like, I thought the whole point of the whole series is that there's this like mysterious army that you had to deal with. Because remember, in the first cold open of season 1, it was about the White Walkers.
Yeah.
And then so throughout all the scenes, they build this threat up, and they're like, the Iron Throne doesn't matter. Cersei's crazy. It's humanity that we have to worry about, that we have to band together and do all this. So now that when you have Arya making the kill with, granted, like a very important dagger that was meant to use to murder Bran, Jon Snow, like, he becomes sort of like a goalless kind of character, a hero without a mission.
Yeah, and that'll be an interesting thing to keep an eye on as we go into these final 3 episodes, because if he doesn't have a particular thing to stop in the north now, he's going to be out of his element going down to the south to deal with Cersei.
Yeah, he never cared for it.
He's never been invested in what's happened down there or any of those politics. He's always just been for the north, and so it's going to be something to watch. Does some sort of like rift form between him and Daenerys, because Daenerys starts to mistrust him and see him as a rival. And yeah, you kind of have to question, like, is Game of Thrones essentially a show about politics, or is it a show about the fantasy, kind of like what you were saying? And is the point that like humans will team up to fight a common enemy up until that common enemy is destroyed, and then we'll just all be terrible to each other afterwards? Are we all essentially like fallible creatures who will screw over our neighbor with zero provocation, to get something for ourselves?
Yeah, that's a great point, because I wonder if it's kind of bound to its title. If you had titled this show A Song of Ice and Fire, like the book series, then clearly the Night King is the end goal, like the fire of Jon Snow and the Red God versus the winter that's always coming. But if you call it Game of Thrones, then it becomes a political drama. So maybe because it called itself Game of Thrones, it was beholden to the drama of the Iron Throne, even though in the grand scheme of things, it really doesn't matter.
Yeah, so maybe something that might happen, and this is total speculation, is just that, like, you know, Jon Snow will try to back up Daenerys to a certain point, and he'll end up giving his life to help advance her to the throne because he kind of doesn't understand the politics or doesn't understand what it takes to or why it's important to do any of that, and he'll stick by his ideals, and it'll eventually kill him because it's not his fight.
Did you ever get the feeling that the showrunners specifically wanted to undermine and subvert people's expectations for this episode, kind of like The Last Jedi?
Oh, like they kind of turned the Night King into Snoke?
Not the Night King to Snoke, but just like making you think that Jon Snow was going to be the hero, or that a lot of characters were going to die, but they end up not dying, even though like there are multiple scenes where they're just being overrun by dead walkers and there's no way they would ever survive. Like, how could a character like Sam survive that kind of thing? And I'm pretty sure I saw Brienne and Jaime get run over by like 2 or 3 times. Because there's a lot of plot armor in this episode. There's a lot of plot armor.
So clearly they have something in mind for a few of those characters, maybe that they survive what they thought they were going to die here, but they'll eventually just die in a really boring way later on.
Yeah, so certain characters, it makes sense. So for like Jaime, it makes sense because he has to face Cersei one last time. The Hound makes sense because he has to fight the Mountain. But a lot of other characters where their character arc is complete, and Game of Thrones had made a habit of killing off characters whose arc is complete and their existence serves no further purpose to the story. It didn't really happen in this episode. And I talked to my buddy after this, but there's a big cross-section of fans that really enjoy this episode. And there's a big cross-section of fans that really didn't. But the fans that didn't enjoy this episode, I feel like anecdotally are the ones that have seen this show from season 1, where they understood the politics and where it came from. And then there's this new subset group of new fans that are just in it for the visuals and like sort of the sort of like, I guess, zeitgeist of human like shared experience. Did you ever get that?
Did I ever like
do you ever feel that like the new fans, the newer fans that join into Game of Thrones later on are very different from the fans that hopped on in season 1?
Oh yeah, well I imagine you could probably say that about a lot of franchises, but yeah, there's probably people who, you know, they're more in the moment viewers who aren't really thinking too much about the character dynamics or
the character arcs or the prophecies that the little clues that this season has laid down.
Yeah, they're probably not getting too caught up in the mythology of the actual world. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that's definitely going on. I don't, but I mean, I think that's the value of finding people that watch the show in the same way that you do, and then, you know, watching it together with them.
I'm not in it for the cheap thrills, and that's what this episode feel like. That's all. Are you, with like 3 episodes left though, if you think about it, you got one more episode to basically clean up that battle. You got another episode directed by Sapochnik, so that's going to be a big battle against the Golden Company, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
And then the last episode to wrap everything up, sort of like an epilogue. So, I mean, if the Night King comes back, I wouldn't be surprised, but I'm pretty sure he's done for good. I think there's just not enough time to revisit his storyline. I think making Bran become the Night King would just be too much of a left turn because they haven't, I think, sowed or planted enough seeds for that idea to happen, even though they've hinted towards it.
Yeah, and those were more like theories than stuff that was really backed up by scenes from the episode. But
I gotta say, like, I'm really disappointed that Game of Thrones is heading into this direction and ending on such a soft note.
I want to kind of see it play out because I haven't fully set my mind against it yet, but we could be very well headed towards a finale for a major show that is going to be divisive for the next, you know, however many years. You know, we could be looking at like the ending of The Sopranos or something more like Breaking Bad, or, you know, so, which is kind of cool because even if the episode itself is not satisfying or it can't deliver on everyone's expectations, at least we've got something to talk about.
The show must go on. By the way, so Rob and I have sort of done these series of posts about characters who have died. It's called His or Her Watch Has Ended. We didn't get as many character deaths as we thought we would.
Yeah, not quite as much writing as we expected.
Right, but go to the website kinetoscope.ca, check it out. We have Beric Dondarrion, Jorah Mormont, Lyanna Mormont, the Night King, Theon Greyjoy, and Melisandre. And we kind of briefly discuss what each of these characters brought to the show and their journeys and how important they were to the plot. More of these coming soon, and by the end of the show, maybe everyone will have a post about how their watch has ended.
Yeah, exactly. Because we will be doing them on not just people who die, but also characters who have their story resolved in some, positive or maybe not so positive way. At least if they survive, we'll still write them up. No, but I think that about does it for this episode. As Jason was saying, head on over to kinetoscope.ca, where we've got 6 posts so far from the his/her Watch Has Ended series, talking about character endings on the show. We've also got a brand new roundup of recommendations for Netflix Canada, if you're here in the north with us. And there's also a review of Avengers Endgame live on the site, which gets into all of the juicy spoilers that we discussed here on the episode, and a little bit of extra criticism as well. Head on over and check that out. But coming to you from Toronto, my name is Robert Snow.
And my name is Jason Chen from Vancouver. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.